give it another moment before we get started. Did hear out of band that Lars and Jay may be up to 15 minutes late because of things going on at the conference that they're at. I'd like to remind everybody that can to go ahead and turn on video. Try to make this as close to an around the table experience as we can. I'll be squinting a lot today. I apologize. My glasses broke this morning and I'm on a makeshift pair and it's eye challenging. So given that Jay and Lars are likely to be delayed, a lot of the hot topic information I'd like to hold on to until they are present. So my agenda bash is to jump forward to the development projects section, and then we'll jump back to the beginning after we after Jay and Lars have had a chance to join. Anybody have any other agenda bashes before we get started?
Notes?
Greg, you started talking, but it took a while for you to cut in. Try again.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm just looking for the notes, and the link in the data tracker for this meeting doesn't seem to lead me to a notes page that looks correct.
It's at, I'll put it into the chat for inside Metaco.
Okay, I see Liz has done that, so.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, the link in data tracker points.
Well, it's the automatic. Normally I've remembered to go put a redirect page back to these because the template that we use for these is different than what Metaco automatically, the data tracker and Metaco automatically generate. All right, so I'm going to start in with a discussion of the data tracker at that point under development projects. Help me keep an eye out for when Jay and Lars join. Hopefully they'll turn on video and it'll be dead obvious. So we had several releases since the last call. The major things that happened were we shifted the data tracker code base to run on Python 3.9, have production running on 3.9. It is 3.9 and not a more recent version of Python because that was what was relatively straightforward for Glenn to install on the system that was beyond 3.6. We added support for the groups and streams needed for the RFC editor model and added them to the menuing. Links are in place. Support for the roles are all in place. What's not yet in place are ballots for RSAB for the new editorial stream. We've worked this out for the IRTF, so it shouldn't be too difficult to make it available to RSAB, but it's not a trivial lift. We've got fairly large set of things that are ready to deploy, but we're in the process of pushing the last few things that we know are ready to go in and running a crawl before we cut a release. We expect that we'll cut a release later this week. Some of the things that are already in there are a fix to the issue that we ran into, where old draft versions have a chunk of text on the page that you're looking at that claimed that they were active. That's been replaced with something that is a little bit more truthful about the current state of the document. Points out what that was active at the time that it was revised. So a bunch of small fixes. We've got a number of PRs that are in process that we hope to bring in fairly soon. There's a list of them in the notes. We are going to start back into the time zone aware timestamp work later this week. The development team will be meeting to refamiliarize ourselves with the problem and the work that was done to date, and then start brainstorming on different approaches that we can take than the one that we had started down with Enric before, so that we can possibly get through this transition without a 4-hour outage as the previous plan had entailed. Our next big lifts after that are listed here. You have seen these before. We need to go through the work to make sure that we're capturing drafts that are fully expanded and aren't relying on external resources. And we've got some fix up to do because we were processing the reference relationships on documents that were submitted in XML without processing the includes that they had. Those are both highly related, but that work's not likely to come in this next month's cycle. It will likely be the one after. The time zone aware timestamp work is pretty large. Anybody have any questions about the data tracker?
Yeah, just a question there. That only affects the submission, right?
The soon after buttons here, the things that we're talking about requiring.
The X include is going to be handled only in the submission subsystem.
That's correct.
That's what I thought you said. I was just making sure.
Yep. Kasara, you want to talk about the high points on Author Tools and the Wagtail website? Maybe.
So on Author Tools, there were several releases. The major changes are I added support for WDIF in IDDIF to similar to the RFC diff. But there are a few changes. So open an issue if it's bothering you. Other main changes to add a new API endpoint for ID needs for data tracker. You can read the upcoming work for Author Tools there. On the any questions about Author Tools? So for Wagtail website, there was one release with package updates and Python version was updated to 3.10. There's some ongoing work with Spring Load. I have added a link to all those issues there. I'll move on to XML to RFC if there are no.
I have one quick question on the website. I saw in some of the communication with Springload, more discussion of single source for the note well text. Is that landed on a design, or is it still, is the conversation still at the we need to figure this out level?
Our requirement is having a single source, so they still haven't come up with the design or any implementation yet.
Because
But
one of the things to remember is we want the data tracker to, and places like the wikis and whatnot to be able to find that same chunk of text and reuse it.
all right, so yeah, that page would be there, but there's text for that page would be in a single place, one place in the admin interface. So that can be added to different places in a IETF website, like registering for mailing list or something like that.
Well, so, but you're still keeping it scoped to the Wagtail website, and I'm trying to say that this single source needs to apply across all of our properties.
Yeah, this is Greg. I'll say that that's I didn't understand that as a requirement in before.
It's the same, and we've got a similar thing coming in with the ID guidelines, the other places where the data tracker has places where it presents them. So the Shepherd report, for example, is currently being put into Wiki.js, and the data tracker is supposed to present it to people so that they can edit directly into it. And we need to have an answer for, having just one copy of these things and not having to keep other places in sync.
So what you want here is some kind of API for this text.
We can go through what the actual mechanics are later. The requirement is that when we change it in one place, and everything else automatically finds that change. An API would be fine. It living in GitHub and everything knows to go get things out of GitHub would be fine. Right? There are different ways that we could skin this. But what we need to get away from is the, data tracker says one thing, website says another thing. Okay, well, I think we've beaten that. We can come back to it. So,
Yeah, we can
I'll
discuss
let you
about
go ahead
it.
and move forward.
So I'll move on to XML to RFC. There are several releases. You can read the release notes there. Major changes are support for Python 3.10, fixed non-Latin name rendering, and I have updated the Docker images, and running that script right now, it makes all the images really quick, especially on new Mac machines. Upcoming work, the major change would be dropping the support for Python 3.6. I believe that would happen this week or next week. There'll be release dropping the Python support for Python 3.6 support. Any questions on XML to RFC?
Hey, Kasara, I have a question for you. This number 792 about usebiv.itf.org, I'm wondering if that's going to help when we use that option add X I include. If it's right now, it puts in the URLs for the citation library for us when we're converting. I don't know if it requires a separate ticket or not. I'll put what I'm talking about into
So,
the chat. So it's this option add X include. Right now it puts in the citation library URLs. Do I need to put in a ticket to ask that that URL be changed to bib.itf.org?
so right now, the bib.itf.org is not in the default list. Sorry, you were little bit breaking up for me. Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
I can ask you over Slack.
Uh,
I'll take it offline.
so this change is adding. So on XML.RC, there are default resources for citations, and this change is to add bib.itf.org as the main one. They all citations should work because we will be setting up redirections when we move to bib.itf.org.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
So Ryan, I see you joined. We have jumped forward to give time for Jay and Lars to join before we go through the hot topics. We are at the mail archive and registration system part. If you just want to speak to it, you can type in notes later.
Sure. There aren't any updates for the mail archive. Registration, I've been working on the feature to switch back and forth, or switch from remote to on-site. Should be deployed today. There was a couple new reports I added this last month, and some bug fixes, basically. But that's about it I have for that.
So on Yang catalog, the Yang catalog project had a large series of major releases over this last 3 weeks. They sent a fairly good summary to the mailing lists for Yang catalog. Eric will put together a report at some point. He wasn't able to get it in by the meeting today because of some Cisco is having its big open meeting this week. He's also worked out a work plan for our contract with Pantheon for the rest of the year, and expects that he'll have that, he'll be able to show us that in the next few days, so we can track what's going on. I entered a few notes about what we've been seeing with web analytics. My perspective is pretty data tracker centric. Greg, do you have anything that you want to add to this that's more general?
But I don't have anything specific to add about www, which is what I mostly pay attention to.
Yeah. So one of the things that Greg and I have been started trying to poke at, but haven't really gotten a lot of traction yet, is it's really hard to see what's going on at the data tracker because of a large amount of garbage traffic that is being accounted for in the analytics system. That means that what that means is that somebody's presenting a request to the data tracker that's going to 404, just because it's either misinformed about how it wanted to construct its URL or was attempting to be malicious, and the agent that presented the request goes ahead and runs the JavaScript that comes back in the response, so the request gets recorded into the analytics. And there is enough of that that it's hard to see the real traffic separated from that garbage traffic, and we're needing to, at least I would like to find a way to filter those things out so that we can look at them separately. All right, real quick through the tail end of this, I still don't see Jay or Lars. We'll just go back to the top of the meeting without them in a moment. We've had no progress on any new actions on the database review. I say that I think Glenn may have done a recheck of the recommendations that they made last. And I think I've got a piece of mail that I need to follow up on from Glenn that talks about our next steps on that. ZX Security has been working their way through the statement of work for the web services running on IETF and sending reports. We've been addressing the more pressing issues that they've been reporting as they've been coming in, and we are queuing up work for some of the ones that are less pressing. There hasn't been anything particularly massive. No frightening results have been coming from them that have required emergency action on our part. But they have been finding some nice nooks and corners of things that we needed to change so that our security posture is a little bit better. At a very high level, this looks like making sure that some of our applications that we're using are at current versions. Some of the libraries that those applications are using are at current versions. Turning off some very old applications that we had still exposed and running that had become vulnerable either through code rot or were vulnerable all the time, but nobody had poked at them. Things of that issue. After we finish the cycle of remediation of the small issues that that they've identified, we do, as said before, intend to publish the revised reports for all of these things. All right, Mailman 3 is still waiting for cycles. That will likely, the dev team will have cycles for that after we get through the time zone aware times temp transition. So let's go ahead and roll back up to the front of the agenda. We'll try to catch Jay and Lars up separately. In the hot topics, the big one, RSC production blocking issues. We have nothing, and thank you, Alice, for the nod towards Kasara's quick work. We are at the point of turning down tools.ietf.org. I expect to do that sometime next week. The final steps are accepting the bibxml work from Ribos, which we are in the process of doing today. Started yesterday. We'll be doing some work on moving repositories today and ensuring that what we've got deployed reflects those moves. Glenn has put together a set of his own files and redirect configuration based on data that I pulled off of the existing service and the information that we had gathered at the tools transition plan. He has those ready for me to review. I plan to review them later today, and assuming we find no issues, they'll be ready to turn on as soon as we have this bibxml service moved. And what this means is that the tools.ietf.org homepage is going to start redirecting to authors.ietf.org, XML the XML to rfc.tools.ietf.org is going to start redirecting into author tools. Other subsites of tools.ietf.org are going to redirect as according to that tools transition plan. Even though we have signaled this to the community for well over a year, I expect that there will still be shock and surprise when the change happens. We'll just need to be ready to field the fallout when we go ahead and make the cutover.
Robert,
Go ahead.
sorry. I put this as I was not mostly, but partly tongue in cheek in the chat. But I do think that some sort of persistent post that summarizes the changes at a time would be a useful reference to point people to when the questions come up about where did you move my cheese, kind of thing.
No, this is what the tools transition plan is intended to be. It's at GitHub, right?
Okay. Yeah, I'll think some more about that. But okay, thanks.
So I just got a note from Jay that he and Lars are going to miss the call completely.
So
one of the
quick
things
question.
that is in queue for the data tracker that I mentioned before is a change to the models so that we explicitly model who attended which session. Medico will tell us at the end of the session who attended. They've already been giving us blue sheets, which just have names instead, or at least in addition to at the beginning. We will start actually getting foreign key relationship between session and person so that we could construct those blue sheets ourselves and then use this for non-com calculations, non-com eligibility calculations going forward. In the process of putting this together and researching the functions for the new non-com eligibility calculations, we discovered that there is a bit of a disconnect in the code and in at least the current leadership's heads around what counts. So the RFCs are a little bit vague, and we are going to be pushing on an edge case now, and it's the leadership's issue to work this out with the community and figure out what we're going to do for eligibility calculations for this non-com in particular. The rough edge is whether or not simply paying for a meeting is enough to count as having attended the meeting. We have a large number of people at IETF 111, which was fully online, that registered, paid, but then attended no sessions. The current leadership is split on whether or not the RSC says what the RSC says for what, whether or not that should count. So I'm anticipating that we will continue to use the current calculations with the full understanding of, the calculations that we had before, with the understanding that just paid was sufficient. And that we'll end up with an RSC that clarifies, and we can shift over to where we're, whatever that RSC clarification results in for the rules. So I was hoping to have Lars here. We don't have anyone from the ISG on the call, I don't think. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. One of the things that ZX Security pointed out to us is that our certs and configuration for our web services allow the use of TLS 10 and 11. And I started a conversation with the ISG about whether or not we should turn that off, and if we needed to tell anybody ahead of time. I was hoping to get the final feedback on how that conversation went in the ISG on this call. We'll follow up with Eric and Lars and find out what the ISG thinks we need to do with respect to telling anyone or not. I think it's pretty clear from the first part of the conversation that everybody on the ISG is just fine with it being turned off. The only question comes around is how much warning do we give people? I'll move on to Zulip.
Do you have any stats from our logs as how much use, if there's any use?
Yeah, there is a small amount of use. It's easiest to get that from looking at Cloudflare's dashboard.
Right.
It is not zero, but it's also very small compared to TLS 1, 2, and above.
So
Could it be old bots or something?
Say again?
Could it be old web bots or something?
Yeah, who knows? I mean, that looking at the particular clients that negotiated it is not something that we have good insight into.
Okay. I'm
So-
just wondering, it could be someone very loud, that's all.
I'll suggest that we disable it only for data tracker login, and that therefore it's just read-only access, and that there's no harm in it.
I wish there was somebody from the ISG here.
Yeah.
So we have an RSC that deprecates these things and tells people to quit using them, that we published as an IETF consensus document.
Yeah, I know. Okay.
So,
It's a little more complicated than that, Rich, like uploading a shepherd's write-up or something like that.
Can't do that without being logged into the data tracker.
I understand, but at any rate, the simple way is to turn it off.
Yeah, I agree. I understand.
okay. Our Zulip service is now fully deployed. We haven't seen anybody complain about the deployment yet. Anybody on the call has seen complaints that I haven't, please let me know. Medico has been looking into integrating the Medico chat directly with Zulip. There are some design questions around how to use the API. We engaged with the Zulip community earlier today on getting a better story. They pointed us to some dark corners of the documentation that we hadn't spotted before that looked fairly promising. Should be able to report in a few days about whether or not this integration is going to be as easy as we anticipate. There was an effort between the last tools call and this one to update the configuration of the working group mailing lists to include the global whitelist for those working groups that didn't have it configured. We're also going to do a little bit of work with the Secretariat to make it easier for them to periodically check this. My suggestion is once a month. To make sure that the working group lists have this list configured. And we've identified the set of remaining lists that don't have the global whitelist configured to in there allow these non-members configuration. And we'll be going through them manually one by one to determine whether or not they should and adding it if they should. So these turn out to be things like the teams for previous meetings, the sisters list, things like this, right? And we've got two other things here. Jay initiated a survey for the tools workshops. The intent was the survey would close at this call. I was hoping Jay could give us a feel for what the participation was and early results. I'll ask him to mail that to the tools discussed list when he's able instead. We've also been working and making more progress than we have for quite some time on getting to the point where wiki.ietf.org is something we expect the community to use. Nick and Glenn have worked so that the authorization configuration matches what is in the document that we have that talks about how we plan to use that wiki. That document's currently a Google document that hasn't been widely advertised, and I'm asking, we'll be having a conversation with Jay a little bit later about when that document can be more widely distributed and more people have a chance to take a look at it. The essence of it is that we've set things up to where the wiki knows about your data tracker roles when you log in. Those data tracker roles give you different tiers of permissions inside the wikis. Working group chairs can do some things, area directors can do some slightly more things, for example. And there's a rough schema of how we expect the resulting wiki to be laid out in the document, and then ultimately we would talk about how we would migrate existing working group wikis into this particular wiki. There are some ongoing conversations. The plan for quite some time has been that we will just move the important bits by manual labor, volunteer labor. unimportant bits would get archived. My intent was to archive them by making the track instances available as a Docker image. There's an ongoing conversation about whether or not an automated conversion of the track wikis into a wiki.js instance that could just be left up as an archival read-only instance makes sense. I have concerns about the fidelity of these automated translations. What we saw of the move of the track wikis into the GitHub wikis doesn't leave me feeling comfortable that we won't lose a great deal of information, at the very least in things like the structure of tables, in such a process.
So the downside, if you have a Docker image that's live and we're not patching it, then that's a problem. But I think you're thinking that it'll just be a Docker image I can pull and bring up and retrieve something out of it and then build it again.
Yeah, Docker image that you just run on your local machine, you can interact with your web browser.
That sounds fine. And I guess the other suggestion I have is to do a mirror of it as HTML and just stick that in a tar file somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Because in some cases, I don't care what the markup is. I care what the output looks like. But I don't think there's a lot. I don't think there's a lot that anyone's going to miss after we. I agree with you that 10 years from now, someone might notice something was corrupt and looking at the history, but no one's going to know until they actually look and go, well, that's wrong.
Yeah. Okay. That's what we had on our agenda. We're now to the open microphone part of this. Anybody have anything that they would like to discuss? We've got 15 minutes left if we want to use it, or I can give that back to you for the rest of your days.
So I'll just point out, Karsten had a question back in the tools discuss and tools.ietf.org movement. I guess I'm jabberscribe. Is there any day-to-day discussion of it that's happening somewhere, like on Tools Discuss or something, about the tools.ietf.org migration? That's Mrs. question. Or you can look at the chat and see.
Someone go read what he wrote as well.
Yep.
A day-to-day update. No.
Let me try to explain what I was after here. There are some people who will have to watch what's going on. Where should they look?
Carson, say that again. I have to turn up my volume.
So there are some people who need to know when things are happening and what's going on. So where should they look? Is there a single place where we can look?
Tools discusses. I will send mail when changes are made to Tools
Great.
Discuss.
Thank you.
All right, not hearing anything from anyone. Thank you for taking your time. And I will see you at, I think we've got one more of these before we're in Philadelphia. So we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you,
Bye,
Robert.
everyone.